and welcome to the second edition of Cooler Heads Prevail, where today we're going to be talking about taxes. You know, a great American, Benjamin Franklin, once said, the only two certainties in life were death and taxes. We're going to be talking about one of those things today. Maybe the other one will creep into it from time to time, but for the most part, it'll be about taxes, more specifically about the recently passed tax bill. And since you went first last time, Jim, I'm going to ask you my question.
Sure.
Okay. What does trickle-down economics mean to you? We'll start it nice, short, and sweet.
Trickle-down economics is the theory that if money is provided or more money is provided to people who are at the top, that the benefits will trickle down to those who have less, the workers, the average person.
Okay. And when you say provided, are you talking about not taxed as much or money actually actively given out?
Let's say not taxed as much.
Not taxed as much. Okay.
And the great philosopher and economist Robin Williams once said in one of his routines that in the theory of the
I'm a huge fan.
trickle down, that the poor are getting pissed on pretty heavily. And, that's the case. Money flows up more like a gas than it does flow down. If you provide a couple $1,000s in tax breaks to the average person, the middle class, for example, that money's going to get spent. That money's going to get spent, and it's going to go into the economy, and there's a multiplier effect that goes 5, 6, 7, 10 times into the economy. Whereas if you give $10,000 to the top 10%, they're like, I got 10,000 more. They hardly notice it. It's not going to make a big difference on their purchases.
Mhm.
It's not going to make a big difference on the economy. For some, there might be some additional investment, but for many, most of it is just going to get stuck in the bank.
More specific to the tax bill that just passed recently. Now, our own Senator Schumer criticized the tax bill for having nothing in it for the middle class. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I would say that what he was referring to is that the top 1% of the population benefits from 34% of the total benefits go to the top 1% in this tax bill. Another 15%.
And when you say that, sorry to interrupt, you're saying that 34% of all the dollars freed up as a result of the tax cut ends up going to the top.
Yes.
tier.
And this came from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities
Okay.
as this source. The top fourth and fifth was 15%. Middle fifth was 9%. The second fifth was 4%. The lowest fifth, 1%. So if you look in the middle down, you're looking at 14% of the benefits went to the bottom 3/5 of the population.
Right.
Economically speaking.
Okay. A couple of points to dig into with what you've said already. Now, first of all, when you're talking about the percentage of what money goes to whom, you and I historically have been well within what would be considered the middle income range. As far as this past tax refund season was concerned, I would have been very pleasantly surprised to receive a check for $100,000.
That would have been great.
That would have been wonderful.
Yeah.
But the only thing is, when I look at a check and I see something that size, I would think it was a mistake, mostly because I didn't pay nearly that much into the system in the first place. What was it that Senator Schumer and Representative Pelosi had in mind that would have made the plan more equitable for the middle class, with the understanding that middle class, through obviously no fault of their own, didn't pay nearly as much into the system per individual in the first place?
For starters, the amount that was reduced on the middle class, the amount of taxes that was reduced was about, I think, 2%, and the amount of for the corporations, it went from 35% to 21%. And that dropped 14%, with the effective tax rate at approximately 18% in 2017. So that's a huge drop. You're dropping from 35 to 21% versus, depending on your tax bracket, 26 to 24. I mean, it is significant, but it's minor. In my paycheck, I end up with about $35 extra each paycheck, which is nice.
That adds up. It definitely adds up.
I could buy a little bit of gas with it. Of course, gas prices have gone up so much that it's pretty much eaten up with gas. I'm still going to have to pay that money back to the government, or my children are, because it was borrowed. It wasn't earned, so it's still going to have to be paid back. So it's only on loan to me at a high, whatever rate the interest is the government's paying. And it brings me to one of my questions for you, which is why now? Why was this tax cut done now? Why was it seen as a important thing now?
Mhm. I think generally speaking, if you're talking about the ability of the economy to work, it pays to keep the taxes as low as possible. And one of the reasons why the Rust Belt states, I think, voted as they did is because they're looking at what's going on with the manufacturing sector in this country, and they really weren't seeing any cogent plan at the time to, if not restore those jobs, to at least slow down the loss of them.
And they were still feeling the effects of the Great Recession,
Sure,
and in an
but
area that
if
was already
if
in
you're talking
decline.
about the recession and how to respond to it, and you're looking at the fact that the U.S. had the top marginal tax rate for corporations at the time, that's not something that I would put in the plus column. And when you consider also the fact that the labor participation rate is lower than it's been since the late 1970s,
Mhm.
we need to do something with the economy in order to spur more job growth. And that's where the sense of urgency comes in. Now, the short answer to that was it was also one of Donald Trump's campaign promises, but
And I think that is where it really, I think that's really why it happened.
mhm.
I think it's a political move as opposed to an economic move.
The overall point that I'm getting at is that I think there's an optimal level of taxation that you can have. If you don't tax enough, then obviously the government doesn't get what it needs to operate. When you tax too much, then businesses and individuals, whether you're talking about high income, low income, or in the middle, get tighter with their money. They're not spending as much.
Let me ask you: do you think that the government was taxing businesses too much previously?
It's difficult at this juncture to really answer that question in any great detail, mostly because we've become, for the past half century or so accustomed to deficit spending that I think one of the questions that your typical elected official fears the most is if you had to balance the budget tomorrow, which means if you had to pay the bills without relying on borrowing of any kind, how would you go about doing that? And that would be a guarantee to send any politician running.
Well, and I've heard the slam of Democrats that they are tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend. Well, do you believe that it's better to borrow and spend than tax and spend?
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit different an answer to that, as you might expect. And one part of that is I'm not going to give Republicans very high marks in that area either. And the reason being that, and this is actually one of the major problems that I have with the recently passed tax bill, which is it doesn't really do very much to rein in some very glaring problems having to do with federal spending. And just to give you a couple of examples,
Hmm.
Washington spends $25 billion annually maintaining unused or vacant federal property.
Hmm.
As of 2009, government auditors spent the past 5 years examining all federal programs and found that 22% of them, costing taxpayers a total of $120 billion annually, fail to show any positive impact on the population they serve. And
Those are a little out of date.
they are out of date, but
But I
I don't
don't see it
imagine.
getting better.
No,
Yeah.
and the reason why that concerns me, and one of the reasons why that I don't give Republicans very high marks, and I don't give Democrats very high marks in this area either, is that whenever there's talk about spending increases, revenue changes in revenue of any kind, there's never any talk about things like this. Just to give you another one. Nearly half of all purchases on government credit cards are said to be improper, fraudulent, or embezzled.
Hmm. I am certainly not for government waste.
And the
And I don't want to pay any more taxes than I have to either. I mean, I would like to pay zero taxes and still have a good educational
Sure,
system, roads. When I drive home from work, see bridges that aren't crumbling. I mean,
but the point I'm getting at, Jim, is Why is there never any talk about that? Shouldn't whether you're liberal or conservative, shouldn't you be every bit as outraged that there's money being thrown away of something like that on things like this?
I
Couldn't that money be better used?
absolutely,
Yeah.
but why can't it be?
Well,
So, I mean, right now you have a Republican president, a Republican House, a Republican Senate. I haven't heard any talk of going after the waste, or if there has, there's been no action
well,
on it.
that's my point. This is going back quite a long way. This is nothing new. But the thing about it is, if the Democrats want to really prove themselves to be the adults at the party, they need to tackle these things because if they're worried about a drop in revenue for the social contract, they should be every bit as outraged
I mean, I think
as
that
those
issue is
items that.
a little bit different than
I
talking
don't think
about
it's any different
it.
because if you're talking about revenue and potential impact to that, I would want any responsible public official to be paying attention to how money is being spent.
I would too. I do. I want that done as well. But that should be done in addition to paying for whatever you're spending. You should pay the government pays for spending by taxation and should not be borrowing unless there's a crisis, unless there's the Great Recession of 2000, starting 2008, 2009, and going for a good
Yeah,
number of years until the measures that were put in place during the Obama administration had a time to take hold. And when there's a large economic downturn, it usually takes 10 years before things recover. I mean, if you take a look at on downturns over the last couple hundred years, that's what maybe not a couple hundred, but 150,
right.
whatever we can track easily. It takes about 10 years to recover from that, if done properly. It takes a while to recover from that. But I wouldn't say that the all this tax breaks going to the corporations and the top 1% is okay because there's waste in the government. I mean,
Hmm.
if you look at defense spending, huge waste. I mean, if you take a look at those numbers,
Well,
I would
you
expect
know what?
that at least half of them
That
have to
that's
do with
You touch on
defense
something
spending.
where the debate normally goes, where if a Democrat is talking about excessive spending, the first item to come up is usually defense spending. And on the Republican side, to be fair, the first thing that you normally comes up is social spending of some kind or another.
I was
But once
specific,
again, this is never coming up.
but
This is money going down the drain.
I suppose that's the fault of all of government, not Democrats or Republicans.
Of course,
Our
yeah,
elected leaders should be going after waste, fraud, and abuse.
yeah.
Absolutely. And, defense is a good chunk of that money. And when you're talking about the numbers about what's been fraudulent and spent irresponsibly, a lot of that goes back to defense spending. I didn't say defense was too much. I said that it goes back to defense spending.
I don't disagree
You
with that.
know,
I mean, there
a
could
couple
very
hundred
well
dollars for a
be.
hammer.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Now I have heard some explanations about that sometimes is a means to hide spending that might be taking place on secret projects or something like that. I can't confirm or deny that since I'm not involved in any of that.
or when you hire Halliburton, Dick Cheney's old buddies to do all this work, and who knows what gets done, what doesn't,
Yeah,
and
but
you're dumping cash into
simply speaking, when it comes down to it, whenever there's any talk about lowering the tax rates for higher income individuals, the first complaint that you hear come out of the mouths of people like Chuck Schumer, like Nancy Pelosi, like Bernie Sanders is the rich should be paying more. Well, maybe in the general scheme of things, if they can prove that they're spending our money responsibly, that might be a true statement. But it's very difficult to tell right now because you have so much waste going on. It really is outrageous. And you know what? The people on the liberal side of the fence should be even more outraged than conservatives because that is money
with
that could be spent on
in
individuals.
the
Wouldn't you
current
think?
administration, there's a huge amount of waste going on in the government with flights here and private jets and buying phone booths for your office that are $46,000 or 32 or whatever it
Regardless,
is.
and you know
I
what?
mean, please,
That's another, you actually touched on one that actually made the list too. Spending ridiculous amounts of money on desk chairs and desks and
and
meeting tables
and
and
twenty
things like
six
that.
thousand dollars for pens.
Yeah, but like I said before, when you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars here, why is there never talk?
I think that would be a good
Why is there
topic,
never
but I don't
talk
want to
about
spend the
things
whole
like
time
that?
talking about that particular issue because I don't think there's anything we can really. I mean,
Yeah.
I
But
agree.
unless there's actual concentration on that particular issue, it's very difficult to say what is fair for any individual to be paying. As far as I'm concerned, although personally speaking, you won't see me shed a tear if somebody of a higher income has to pay more in taxes. I really honestly don't think, as a matter of greater principle, that the government has any business asking anyone for more money unless they can show that they're spending what they're getting more responsibly. The irresponsible spending certainly didn't start with Trump. I hope it ends soon. Whether that happens or not, a lot of that depends on whether or not you have people in Washington that are willing to make those tough decisions. And it doesn't look like we have that now any more than we did during the Obama presidency, during Bush 43.
I think that the Obama administration was incredibly stable and steady in
These things
everything.
that I came up with were going on during the Obama administration. I hate to disappoint you, but
Which ones are you?
all of them, all of
Well,
them I
you said
read on.
2009 numbers, so if
Yeah,
they're look, but I got it. If they're looking at 2009 numbers, what they did is they went back 10 years to look at things. That was during the Bush administration. So if you're
so
looking at 2016
do
numbers, that would be actually during the Obama administration. And I'm
I
but
don't recall any serious attempt to rein any of this stuff in during the Obama White House. And I'm just being completely fair and objective.
but
Now, to be fair and objective, I don't see anything during Bush 43 that really seriously tackled this. Bush never vetoed a spending plan.
and
Never did. And had all sorts of nonsense like this going on.
and I believe he said that we have the treasure to fight this war when they went into, Iraq and did all that. We have the treasure, which depleted the treasury. But again, I want to get back to the question: do you believe that this current tax break on for the wealthy and moderate yet temporary benefits for the middle class was necessary at this time? You did say that you thought it would be helpful for maybe the unemployment rate, and I saw in the news today that there are more positions available
Yeah.
than there are people to fill them.
Hmm.
So there are positions. Now, maybe what we need to do is do more education and training to have a more educated population, specifically trained to the skills that are needed right now, which is something that government could do. Is, you know, hate to bring up Bernie Sanders, but he's interested in free college tuition for for the nation, and that would be something that would stimulate the economy. If you look at one of
I'm
the
not going to poo-poo that right off the bat, but I would want it to be accompanied with a plan on how to pay for it. And I would personally find it or very refreshing, rather, if that included a plan on how to rein in spending in areas where money is not being spent in a productive way.
again, we should certainly rein in spending where it's being wasted.
Hmm.
No one's for wasting money except the people who are profiting by, having zero contract bids, hiring your cronies and family for things, which I think is being done more now than ever. But, you know, that's a huge waste of money. But if you take a look at a lot of the notable waste in the current administration, that a lot of contracts have gone to their past companies, and you look at Halliburton
Hmm.
with it. I mean, a lot of nepotism going on, a lot of helping out your
Yeah.
buddies,
I
and
mean, I'm
zero
not
contract
defending it,
bids.
but if you're trying to portray that as something new, it's not. It's something
Not
that's been
new,
going on
but
for a long
those are things
time.
that shouldn't be happening, though.
Right.
Those are
Yeah.
things that shouldn't be happening. I mean, no one's going to disagree with that.
Hmm.
But the government does do important, useful things, and
Of course.
that's why
Yeah.
it taxes. It needs to run. We have taxation. We have a government, federal, state, local, because there are things that individuals can't do. I can't go out and build a road. I can't build a school myself.
Let me put it this way. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to pay anything in taxes. If the government was able to provide everything that it provides for absolutely free, then that leaves all that money in the economy for whether you're a business, big or small, or whether you're an individual or not, millionaire or not so much. That all that money is freed up to spend at your discretion. I think it's important for people to have as much discretion over how their money gets spent as possible. And if you're talking about businesses specifically, you have to look at taxes as a business expense.
Mhm.
Somehow or another, that expense is going to need to be paid. That usually comes from having to charge more for the goods and services that they provide. Sometimes that means they're not going to hire as much. Sometimes it means that they're not going to pay their employees as much. With all due respect to Senator Schumer, Representative Pelosi, Bernie Sanders, the places that you need to look if you want to get support from moderates like me is, what are you doing about this? What is your plan to tackle that?
Well,
Before you're talking about before you start complaining about how much or how little.
I'm
um,
concerned about the deficit. I mean,
yeah,
I'm, I'm,
this
I'm
has direct
I'm
implications for the
hugely concerned
deficit.
about the deficit, and that should be part of it, and it always should. Waste, frauds, and abuse.
Hmm.
But I'm concerned about the deficit. This 1.5 to 2.3 trillion dollars that has just been borrowed against my children's future. They're going
Hmm.
to have to pay back. Somebody's going to have to pay back, and
Yeah,
you know,
and what a lot of people don't realize, and one thing to make clear before I make the statement, I'm not in any way disputing the existence of Medicare or Social Security. I think they're very worthwhile programs. But
mhm,
at the same time, when you consider the fact that people are living much longer than they did when these programs were first instituted,
sure,
that's one of the
it's
main
helping them live
reasons.
longer.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's great. Yeah, but the problem is that we're not facing the reality that, or of the true expense that is going to be
Hmm.
to working people in general. Now, one of the ways that you remedy that is by putting more people in the workforce, or at least creating a condition where more people are able to get work.
Or if you have more people in the country working,
Hmm.
younger people, we have an aging population.
We do have an aging
So
population. I think that
immigration would be a good way to have a younger population.
you know what, I definitely agree with you on that, and that was something that I was going to bring up. I mean, you and I are descended from immigrants.
Absolutely.
And I'm certainly very proud of that. Matter of fact, it might surprise you to know that my family has enjoyed the blessings of immigration much more recently
Oh
than
yeah.
the 3 generations or 2 generations ago that my family first came to this country. It's a wonderful thing, and obviously we're going to do a show having to do with immigration
How
at this
about
point.
how about jobs programs, education, infrastructure, truly funding infrastructure? I would rather have seen $1 trillion spent on infrastructure and education.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that
I think we're getting to that point where American society needs more emphasis on, as far as the educational system is concerned, more attention paid to preparing students for specific roles within the economy.
Full disclosure, I'm a school counselor on the high school level, so I know a little bit about that.
Yeah,
And the thing about
yeah.
the educational system is we do have programs to prepare students for specific jobs,
Hmm.
but the economy, the technology, the world is changing so fast. People are going to end up changing jobs 2, 3 times, different careers.
Right.
It is going to be important to have a broad base
Right,
of
and we
skills.
know people who have done exactly that, and some of them have done
Doing quite well.
extraordinarily well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and which is certainly a good thing. Which is another thing that we need to be preparing people for. Let's say you acquire a marketable skill, but it's not exactly your dream job. Stay tuned, because if you do well at this job, then that could very well be the door that opens for something that you like better.
Sure.
So this is what it comes down to, Jim. I think this is something that we can apply toward the solution portion of the program, which is, let's have a balanced approach to making sure that the federal government stays within its means, and that we have the growth that we need amongst the working public, that people can sustain themselves and be active, productive contributors to the economy.
And I would suggest that you started off with trickle-down economics. That if there had been large tax breaks, if you gave the corporation, if you flipped it, if you gave corporations a 2% tax break and individuals a 14% tax rate, the economy would skyrocket. There would be money in people's pockets and they would be trying to find places to spend it, that would spur all sorts of business. Money doesn't trickle down, it goes up.
That is where we need to get tougher on the opposition then, to if they feel that they have a better idea, or if they feel that how things are headed right now is a bad idea, that they need to come up with alternatives.
That would be the blue wave we're looking for in November.
We'll see. We'll see. Maybe, maybe not. I think, if anything, what we want are more innovative and responsible people in Washington. And I'm not necessarily sold on the idea that those people would come from any one particular party.
Honestly, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of great Republicans out there that want to be fiscally responsible, and they've been caught up in this Trumpism stuff. And 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 I think part of the problem is they've been opposed to everything Obama did for so long that their ideas got a little exaggerated. But and so they've gone with it. But I think there's a lot of fiscally responsible Republicans out there that do not like this current tax
Yeah, and
bill
I
in
think
Congress too.
Well, yeah, and a lot of them were actually very vocal about it. And partisanship for the sake of it has always been a huge turnoff for me,
Me too.
regardless of who it was directed toward. And that's one of the reasons why we have this show in the first place. So that's one of the reasons why, in the end, we can only hope that cooler heads will prevail.
I hope so.
So I think that's about as far as we can get with this particular topic for now. Thank you all for joining us,
Hope you've enjoyed it.
and we'll see you next time.